you very much, members of the committee. I'm going to call this meeting of general laws to order. Clerk, if you can open the roll for attendance. Madam Clerk, if you could read off the remaining names.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Delegate Torian. Delegate Torian. Delegate Murphy.
Here.
Delegate Murphy is present. Delegate Price.
Present.
Delegate Price is present. Delegate Cole.
Present.
Delegate Cole is present. Delegate Knight.
Here.
Delegate Knight is present. Delegate Miyares. Delegate Miyares. Delegate Brewer. Delegate Brewer. Delegate Wampler.
Hey,
Delegate
Clerk,
Delegate Miyares is present.
Here.
Delegate Wampler is present. Delegate Miyares is present. Chairman Bulova.
I am here, and I apologize that my internet is being finicky. Madam Clerk, you can close the roll. A quorum is present. All right, so again, thank you very much, members of the committee. Really appreciate you being on for this meeting on a Saturday afternoon. I want to particularly thank our ABC subcommittee. And so as much as I hate to bring people together on a Saturday, they've been working really hard. They've had at least three subcommittee meetings where they've heard a lot of testimony, and they're working through a very complex bill. And I just want to say that I really appreciate all of their hard work in advance. So today we are going to talk about House Bill 2312. And so we're going to start off with asking Chairman Krizik to provide a subcommittee report. Believe that our staff, our council, is going to go through some of the major points of the bill. We will take public testimony. For those who are waiting in the public room, we do have a number of people who wish to speak, and so we're going to try to keep our comments to a minute and a half or less, just to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be heard. And if you're on the same page as other groups, please just go ahead and chime in and let us know that, and then we will open it up for committee discussion. I do want to remind the committee that this is stop number 1 along 3 stops. And so if we favorably report a bill today, it will go to courts and then will likely go to appropriations after that. And so our primary job is to ensure the mechanics of the regulatory infrastructure that would be put in place, that we think through all the mechanics of those. And so we are a critical part of that, but by no means the end of that. And I know people will have concerns about the budget aspects as well as the courts aspects, but our job is to look at the mechanics of the regulatory infrastructure. Before we actually go forward with Chairman Krizik's report, we do want to incorporate Delegate Heretic's House Bill 1815 into House Bill 2312. That is a voice vote, but could I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second.
All right, properly moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, that bill is properly incorporated into House Bill 2312. All right, and with that, Chairman Krizik, let's get your subcommittee report.
Thank you, Chairman Bulova. Thank you, committee members. We have the ABC Gaming Subcommittee of General Laws has met 3 times, as you mentioned, 5.5 hours of meetings, and we adopted the substitute that's before us to report to courts on a 6-1 vote, and I so move.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded to bring the substitute ahead of us. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, the substitute is properly before us. Chairman Krizik.
So our goal was to craft the best regulatory framework we can to legalize adult use of marijuana in a safe and equitable manner possible, with a critical focus on public safety and a strong lens on social equity to address the prior harm to disproportionately affected communities and individuals. I'm going to just mention the biggest changes. There were a lot of technical small things that we corrected, and we have counsel who will go walk us through the bill. But on the high level, kind of the bigger issues, number one, we created a new authority under which marijuana would be regulated. So it would not be under ABC. Number two, we capped the categories of licenses. We used the middle number of the JLARC reports. So we kind of cut the baby in half there. Number three, we banned vertical integration, but we do recognize that a hybrid model to ring fence for the medical marijuana industry is probably necessary. Number four, we tried to limit advertising in as much as is constitutionally allowed. And number five, we really tried to strengthen the social equity issues. We made a number of changes there, and the council will go through that. It recognizes the importance of HBCUs and labor protection, for example. Number six, we removed the ability of localities to opt in or opt out, and all of the difficulties that manifest when that occurs. And I'll just give you a couple of them, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this. But if you have an opt-in situation, you could have a lot of rural folks, especially, would have to travel long distances. Opting out is there's a whole host of issues around what happens if you opt out 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and you've already got a manufacturing plant, you've got farms, you've got dispensaries. What happens to them? Do you grandfather them in? Don't you? There was a lot of issues there. So that really is the major pieces. I probably have missed one or two, and I'm sure there's some things that we did that you might find more important or more impactful, and you want to discuss it. And that's why we will have counsel now. Mr. May, if the chairman is ready, we can have him go through it.
All right, thank you, Mr. May, and appreciate all your hard work on this. I know this has been a labor of love for the past couple of weeks, and you've spent some long nights. You could probably recite this without even looking at your notes at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, all the subcommittee members did a lot of work on this, so it was a pleasure to work with them. I'll start first with the changes that we made after looking at some of the changes that the Senate made. We adopted some of those, and some of them we did not. As far as the ones that we adopted, similar to the Senate bill, we took ABC out of the mix and created this new Virginia Cannabis Control Authority. In doing so, we took Title 4.1, we split it into two pieces, Subtitle 1, Subtitle 2. We put all the alcohol in Subtitle 1. Everything about cannabis would now be in Subtitle 2. In 4.1-602 and 604, we require this new authority to develop guidance and guidelines for home growers who are growing marijuana at their home for personal use. In the sixth enactment, we require the authority to work with several secretaries of the Commonwealth to initiate a campaign regarding public awareness, public health, safe driving by January 1, 2023, which is a year before retail sales start underneath the terms of the bill on January 1st, 2024. Next, in 4.1-606, subdivision 14, we added a social equity slot for businesses that are owned, at least 66% of the businesses owned by someone who attended a historically Black college or university in the Commonwealth. Also in the sixth enactment, we require the authority to develop and implement its diversity, equity, and inclusion plan for social equity applicants by January 1st, 2023, which would have the effect of just getting that program up and going a year before retail sales start, to let the social equity applicants start getting everything lined up. In the enactments, we also pushed the date back a year to allow for that switch from ABC to the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority. So much of the dates were just pushed back 12 months, except for going ahead and immediately getting the boards set up. And then in 4.1-600 and 4.1-800, we put in provisions that allow a cultivator to sell immature plants and seeds directly to the home growers. The next set of amendments, and from here on out, will be amendments that our subcommittee made without regard to the Senate bill. All right, the first three are kind of related to the boards created in the bill. In section 2.2-2499.1 and in 4.1-603, we gave the General Assembly board appointments formula. They were all going to be appointees of the governor, and we did that in accordance with the rules of proportional representation. Next, we got rid of the Cannabis Control Advisory Board, with the idea being that advisory board was only originally put into the bill because they wanted a board that was solely focused on cannabis. But now, since we created a new entity that's solely focused on cannabis, there was no reason to have the advisory board any longer. And then finally, on the boards, we added some requirements regarding geographic diversity in board membership, which would be required in additional to ensuring that we have racial, ethnic, and gender diversity in the board membership. Next set of changes, well, really just one main, was about the social equity. For the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund purposes, we made some tweaks to the language there. Make sure it wasn't limited to youth. It was available to all persons. We added some language about apprenticeships near the job training programs. The way we describe support versus making whole again certain families and communities. And overall, we aligned the language between 2.2-2499.3 and 2499.4 to make sure that the terms were consistent. This next category of changes has to do with, kind of the main structure of the regulatory scheme and the licenses underneath that scheme. Starting off with 4.1-606 and the sixth enactment, we imposed a requirement that basically the number of licenses issued is going to be limited. It's going to be a maximum of 400 retail licenses, 25 wholesale licenses, 60 manufacturing licenses, 450 cultivator licenses. And we require a reassessment of these licenses to ensure that geographic dispersion, that they're spread out across the state, of the retail licenses at certain benchmarks, which would be after the issuance of 100 licenses, 200 licenses, and then 300 licenses. In 4.1-805C, there was an exception that allowed a person to get more than 5 cultivation licenses. We got rid of that exception. We also imposed the limit that says, no person can get more than 5 licenses, period, regardless of the license type. Next, in 4.1-804 and 1000, we limited retail marijuana stores to selling retail marijuana products, and retail marijuana paraphernalia. There was language in the bill that contemplated these stores being able to sell other things, maybe even be a restaurant, and we took those provisions out. So that a retail marijuana store is purely a retail marijuana store. In 4.1-606C4, we gave authority to the Cannabis Control Authority to limit the size of retail stores. We did put a cap on that, though, of 1,500 square feet per retail store. In the enactments, there was formerly some language that exempted the initial promulgation of regulations from the APA. We took that out. In 4.1-1401 and 3.2-4117.2, which deals with test results. We changed the language initially said that if you have some bad test results of a product, referring to contaminants in the product, you have 30 days to let the board know. We chopped that down to 7 days. We also made sure the language was clear regarding not only are you supposed to look for whether too many contaminants or any unallowable contaminant, but also as to THC potency. And then finally on that front, we changed the penalties. The first violation is going to be $1,000. Second violation is going to be $5,000. And the third one is going to be a suspension of your license for 6 months if it's your third violation within 5 years. 4.1-1202, 1206, 805, 600, a bunch of other provisions. We prohibited vertical integration, and we require that product be moved through the various tiers by a wholesaler. So if you're a cultivator, you cannot also be a manufacturer. No person can hold an interest in a license that's in a different tier from what they already have an interest in. So you can't be a retailer and a manufacturer. You can't be a manufacturer and a cultivator, vice versa. Next, 4.1-600 and 804. We gave the privilege, similar to cultivators, to retail stores to sell immature plants and seeds to people who are going to engage in home growth. In 4.1-604 and 4.1-1402, regarding the powers and duties of the board, we're going to require that each retail marijuana product and retail marijuana in general includes a label that has the web address for a website that we have required the authority to put together, that's going to include information about responsible consumption, the dangers of cannabis use, and how, for instance, cannabis can preclude you from certain employment opportunities. In 4.1-603 and 606, we basically put in their requirement that regarding regulations promulgated by the board of directors of the authority, any of the regulations that have to do with public health, they are going to have to consult with the Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council in making those, and can only promulgate them if they can get consent of a majority of the members of that advisory council. In 4.1-1101, we require that home growth be done indoors, in addition to the requirement that it be done in a place that you cannot see from a public area. And then finally, we got rid of the local referendum options, as Chairman Kriesig had pointed out earlier, so there's no opt-in or opt-out provisions. And then in 4.1-600, we tweaked the definition of advertisements to make sure that it's going to cover anything that's done on the internet, basically digital, electronic. And then these last set of changes are the ones that we recently put together last night or today. We, in 4.1-900, we're going to allow the board to suspend or revoke someone's license if the employer, one, fails to stay neutral on any union organizing efforts by the employees, two, does not pay a prevailing wage per the U.S. Department of Labor, or three, designates more than 10% of its employees as independent contractors. We also, in the newest draft, reinserted the advertising rules back in. We had contemplated the idea of having an outright ban at one point, but we have since gone back on that and put our advertising restrictions back in. And with that, we made a couple of tweaks regarding making sure outdoor advertising is in compliance with federal law, and putting a requirement that radio and TV ads can only be run during the times that kids are in school. And we declared the purpose of the ad limitations is to displace the illicit market and provide the public with information regarding the location of marijuana establishments. And then finally, in 4.1-606, we got rid of the social equity applicant option number 5, which basically said you could qualify for a social equity license if you have 10 or more employees and 66% of them meet the criteria set forth in the first 3 clauses and owned at least 49% of the business. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, David. Really appreciate that update. That was very comprehensive and a lot of info to get out there in a very organized way. Before we go to public testimony, does any member of the committee have any clarifying or technical questions they would like to ask of Mr. May or our chair? Delegate Price.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. May. I was wondering, and having watched some of the conversations occur, if there were many changes that were incorporated, or are we still at the discussion phase about how, I guess, a relationship or alignment with the medical marijuana, like how do they become a part of this, and that input, if there were changes coming from those conversations, or if that was still being discussed?
Chairman Kriesig, you want to give us a kind of a status on that?
Yeah, and we, as I said earlier, we're cognizant of the issue there, and we're not trying to hurt the medical marijuana industry, the fledgling industry. And so, but this is a big lift to get this bill to where it is right now, and that was just a hurdle too high to overcome. And perhaps this committee here today can address that. I think our concern was we we do not want to have anybody monopolize the industry like a big tobacco situation, or multi-state organizations. We're trying to keep this local and keep it dispersed so that there's many players and many opportunities for Virginians. So that was our big concern, but we do recognize that is an issue, and I think the committee is more than happy to work with us today or through the process and see if we can address that.
Yeah, I think Delegate Price, if I could, that's something that the subcommittee, as I got to watch their deliberations, spent a lot of time on, which was how to ensure that we are not creating inadvertently potential monopoly situations. And so there were some ideas passed around about how do we make sure that, again, we respect, what we had set up in terms of our medical marijuana, while also not giving them an unfair advantage that would allow them to capitalize on that. And so I don't know that we have the capacity to try to solve that issue today, but I do know that it's an issue that the patron of the bill, Delegate Herring or Leader Herring, cares very much about. And so I suspect that is going to be one of those issues that we continue to work on as this bill proceeds through the process.
Yeah, just a follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Price.
Well, I guess more of a statement. And speaking to that, I'm very interested in that as well. And what I did hear were some concrete ideas. And so if it's not here that they would be discussed or that we would be making those amendments, then I'm sure that the chairwoman of courts could involve that there. But I did just want to raise the flag because while I'm hearing the concern about ratios and things like that, I'm also hearing from constituents about availability of product that would not be at retail stores that, as was discussed earlier, life-saving and allowing for people to really have a quality of life that otherwise they would not. So I would not want to hurt that as well. And I assume that is also the stance of the rest of the committee, but I wanted to publicly voice those concerns.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
I do know it's on the radar. Let's see, Delegate Aird, then Delegate Van Valkenburg, and then Delegate Wright.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have a question that I think is pertinent for the public discussion around vertical integration, and maybe I'll ask this of council. May I ask, the approach that we have taken to ban vertical integration, does that prohibit the continued existence of medical entities from coinciding even with bringing on the retail market?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Aird, no, it doesn't. What we put in the bill regarding pharmaceutical processors in relevant part was one, a stipulation that said, don't construe anything in this bill to think that they're not allowed to get a license. We make clear that they are. We also said that they can operate their licensed establishment at the same place that they're currently operating our pharmaceutical manufacturing facility. We also, so as far as their operations as a pharmaceutical processor, we don't change any of those rules. We don't say you can't do what you're doing now. We just say that if you want to participate in this market that we've set up for the regulatory scheme of adult use marijuana, you can get a license and you're going to be treated like everyone else. But none of this will affect your current operations. Right. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Aird, for asking that question, because I think that provides a little bit of clarity that, again, our pharmaceuticals and medical marijuana, we're not changing the vertical integration that we already said that they could do. It really has more to do with participation in the new market that we're creating, and they would be on that same level playing field. Delegate Van Valkenburg.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think if I could speak to Delegate Price's point.
Yes, Delegate.
Thank you. I think, and two, to kind of just bring up, because I was one of the people who talked most about this, I think we all on the subcommittee share Delegate Price's concern, right? We want to make sure that the medical field is allowed to exist for the reasons that she laid out, quite frankly, right? And so where we got skeptical is, right, well, how do we create the guardrails that allow them to enter the the legal field without bullying other people out of the market, right? Because we want to have local businesses that are locally owned. We want that social equity ownership piece to be strong and to work. And we want companies to be as Virginian as possible, right? Even if some outside players will come in. And so one of the things that's in the initial bill, right, is this idea that they can expand with up to 5 licenses into the legal world. And kind of where I think, speaking for myself, and I think the subcommittee, where some of that tension comes is like, okay, well, if you get those 5 licenses, it depends on where they are, right? So if, for instance, the example I gave in sub is if South Richmond has the medical marijuana space for medical marijuana, but then they have 5 licenses that are all in South Richmond, right? You know, if those medical have 30 out of 400, that seems like a small market share, right? That we've capped them. But if they have 5 of 25 in Richmond, or they have 5 out of 10 in South Richmond, all of a sudden, even if we're trying to use the funds that they create for social equity, a lot of those other businesses are going to struggle to compete with those folks. And so one possible idea that was thrown out, but that I think needs kind of to marinate is, well, what if they can get those 5 licenses, but they have to be dispersed geographically, right? So they're still getting the funds that they need to keep the medical side open, but they're not dominating one particular market within the Commonwealth.
And I see that we've got a lot of hands up. And I guess what I would like to ask, because we can discuss the policy points after we hear testimony and make sure that we're able to do our business within our 2-hour slot. But I'd rather if we can focus on kind of clarifying questions or technical points that can be directed at council so that everybody understands what the substitute does. So I guess with that in mind, if it's a larger policy debate, please hold off. If it's a specific question directed at council, this is when we do that. Delegate Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for council, please.
Yes, Delegate Wright.
I heard him mention that the opt-in, opt-out feature for the localities had been stricken from the proposal. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Wright, that's correct.
Would you tell me the reason for that, please?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Wright, yeah, I think it was the understanding of the subcommittee that we wanted uniformity across the Commonwealth, and the subcommittee did not want a piecemeal structure where you were jumping locality to locality where it's allowed somewhere and it's not in the next place. And they wanted to make sure that the citizens of the Commonwealth kind of had equal access across the entire state. But we may
Delegate Wright.
Mr. Chairman, suppose you live in an area where the citizens don't want it. They don't want it, and they would either put it to a referendum or whatever. I don't understand the rationale behind saying this is what you're going to do whether you want to or not. It doesn't sound like
to do it.
Yep. Delegate Wright, I guess what I'd say is the good point taken. As part of the discussion afterwards, if we could stick to the technical part, which is confirming that at least in this version, we've taken the opt-in and opt-out out of the bill. And so I guess hold your fire in terms of arguing one way or the other.
Well, could I ask one more question along that line?
Yes, Delegate Wright.
Does the locality have a right to say in which zone these businesses operate, or do they have no right to limit the place? Can it be beside a church, for instance, or what type of zoning would be applicable for this type of business?
Council?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Wright. Yeah, so a locality is going to have the same control that they have over any other business. Choosing where businesses go and placing other restrictions on the businesses as well. So just like any other business locality, we'll be able to impose those rules, yes.
Thank you.
And I guess council, there are some specific prohibitions in terms of proximity to schools and stuff like that, if I recall.
Yes, Mr. Chair, there is some language in there about proximity.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see, Chairman Torian.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for council. Can you give me the rationale and reason, again, maybe I missed it, why the prohibition against vertical integration? What was the reasoning for that, please?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Torian, yeah, the primary rationale was to avoid anyone from monopolizing the industry. The intent was that no vertical integration would be better for the small businesses and prevent the large companies from taking over all of the various tiers of the industry.
Chairman Torian?
Okay, I just knew that for the patron that was important, and I was just wondering whether or not we heard her rationale behind being an advocate for that.
Yep. Nope. And after we get through the testimony, I know we'll have an opportunity for Leader Herring to chime in and have the last word on the bill before we do any voting. Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I honestly am not sure if this is a question for council or if it is a policy related. I just, and I appreciate all the hard work on this. This is an incredibly complex and detailed bill to do in such a short order. But getting back to the vertical integration as well as the medical piece, I really don't understand. Is what we've come up with really the best we can do? I feel like I understand the need for guardrails, and I understand the need for not wanting one, especially outside company, come and usurp the business or the larger profit, I guess, that comes from this. But frankly, what I care deeply about is the medical program, and I feel very strongly that without allowing a sort of a co-located licensor, the medical programs will fail. And there's lots of data and prior experience to show how difficult it is to reduce prices for patients and also just sustain itself if we don't allow the processors that have already put a ton of money expense into product and development and growth and process to also compete in the adult use market for the purposes of, in part, driving down those costs and also just vertical integration. And even when you talk about small businesses and we're talking about equity and social equity, if you can't do seed to sale, that just seems to me a problem. So I just wonder, is this really where we are? Is this the best we can do? Or is there room to do a little better? I just really don't know. So I appreciate any response to that question.
Yeah, Delegate Adams, fair question. And I guess what I would go back to kind of my earlier remarks, which is this is stop one of three within the committee structure. And so this has been flagged as an issue that deserves and needs some additional discussion. Don't know where that conversation will ultimately go. And so it'll be an issue that I think will be the subject of some back and forth. And there's different perspectives on this particular one, but I can't imagine that this would be the final stop with respect to how we land on vertical integration. Delegate Price and then Delegate Fowler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was listening to council say that the advisory board was taken out because it was put in based on it being with ABC, and now we're not with ABC. But it just sparked for me. I did want to know what are the entry points then? Because the advisory board sometimes seems to me that there's citizen or resident input at that point. So I wanted to know, where are the points where the impacted communities can engage in this process so that we'll know, when they have that opportunity, not just legislatively now, but like once we pass a bill, where do those communities have an input into how this will be done and how it would affect them?
David, maybe if you, since we did change it for, again, that advisory council, that was meant to inform the ABC authority board. And so, of course, now that we're standing that up separately, you don't need a separate board to inform them. They are that board. And so, I think structurally it's not much different than what we already had in terms of that input. Maybe, David, you can kind of describe what that new structure would consist of in terms of the advisory councils and work groups, so that everybody kind of gets a sense of how this particular authority would operate and what information feeds into their decision-making process.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Price. Yeah, so that was the only really like board structure wise change that we made, big one. So how it would work is basically in taking that board out, what we got in exchange was a big board of directors, which is the highest board of this authority. So they're basically the bosses of this new authority. Because they're solely concentrating on cannabis, we didn't need the other board that we created. So, you know, you may lose the membership, and maybe that's what you're referencing, the membership, the community membership on that board. But aside from that, you're not losing anything substantive. You do have a board now that's focused solely on that. And if we have any lack of community participation that you're looking for, we can certainly add that in through the structure that we have now created. But you know, we didn't necessarily do anything to account for that membership loss, if that answers the question.
Yeah. And I guess Delegate Price, one of the things, and I forget whether council mentioned this or not, in the original bill, there were a number, I guess the bill basically allowed for you not to use the full Administrative Processes Act. And so again, you know, the board and the authority are charged with developing regulations based on the general guidance that we've provided in this bill. The real meat of it will be through that regulatory process. I think one of the things that we were a little concerned about was language in there that says that you didn't have to go through the APA. And so that was a change to go ahead and say, no, you do need to go through that APA. And one of the reasons for that was in order to maximize, you know, as many voices as possible being heard in the development and implementation of the regulations that the authority would adopt. Delegate Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just one question, I guess. I am wondering if the license holders will be required to, I guess, collect and pay into some type of a healthcare fund that the folks, I think, will undoubtedly probably need, you know, to deal with the health consequences of the long-term use of marijuana. So I didn't know if that was part of this bill or not. So just listen for an answer, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Council?
Mr. Chairman, we do have, I'm trying to locate the provision right now to say the relevant section number. I think we've got, maybe in 614, I'm trying to pull it up here. We do allocate, so it's not necessarily licensees themselves devoting this money, but we do make devotions of the money for health reasons. And that's what I'm trying to locate here. Yeah, so basically what we say, it's in 4.1-614, titled Disposition of Monies Collected by the Board. And basically what we're talking about here is the revenue that we're generating throughout this structure. And in that, we devote that revenue specifically via appropriations in the General Appropriation Act. And one of them says that 5% is going to go to public health programs. We also have 25% to substance use disorder prevention and treatment programs as of right now. So yeah, there's some of that money will be going towards it, just not directly from the licensee, but from the board collection of revenue.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Delegate Fowler?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Delegate Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for council?
Yes, Delegate Tran.
I just wanted to make sure, council, that I understood. So on the medical side, vertical integration is still allowed. It's just on this side that it's not. And could you just help me understand why the decision around the difference between the two?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Tran, yeah, that's correct. It's allowed underneath their pharmaceutical processing piece because it's currently allowed and we're not changing their rules. We did not allow it under the new regulatory adult use market. And again, the justification there was really just an attempt to prevent large companies from monopolizing the various tiers of the new industry.
Okay. Delegate Tran, to answer your question? Perfect. All right, so seeing no more hands up, Madam Clerk, I believe that we have a number of folks who want to testify for and against this bill. Like I said, it's a good number, but manageable if everybody is relatively succinct in their remarks. And so, Madam Clerk, if you could start inviting people into the room.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We will first hear from Alexander McCauley of McCauley and Jameson. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone, and you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chairman Bulova, members of the committee. My name is Alexander McCauley. I represent JUSHI, which is the medical cannabis licensee in Northern Virginia. We want to thank Leader Herring for the continuing improvements to this bill to move towards a hybrid model. We've had a lot of good time with Subcommittee Chair Krizek on this topic, and the bill is definitely improving in this regard, and we want to express our thanks for that. There are some amendments that were done to the Senate bill that we think could help clarify how this will work together, and we have provided those amendments to the subcommittee chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chairman, we will next hear from Matt Zeller of Dominion Cannabis. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. It's an honor to be addressing you. My name is Matt Zeller. I'm the CEO of a startup in Virginia called Dominion Cannabis. We actually are a group of businessmen and women who have been involved heavily in the cannabis industry in New England and in Oregon, and have at this point over a decade's worth of experience operating in multiple states. We'd love to be able to offer our expertise further to the Commonwealth. We think the bill as proposed is a great place to start. We would urge you, however, to consider the adoption of something called the state bank. Please look into what Massachusetts has done. It absolutely revolutionizes how the industry can operate in terms of cash flow, paying their bills, their employees, et cetera, along with getting access to finance. And we would urge you to really consider vertical integration for a number of the reasons why have been discussed. We started out as a very small business of just a couple of investors with our own personal money putting in. And what we've learned, if you don't have, as you've said, from seed to sale, it makes it very hard to grow that business. But we urge the Commonwealth to pass legalized cannabis, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chairman, we will next hear from Sean Fair, also of Dominion Cannabis. Mr. Fair, if you can ensure that your microphone is unmuted. Mr. Chairman, I see that he is here. He may just be having issues. I'll move on to the next speaker, which is Jean Michelle Padini of the National Organization of the Reform of Marijuana Laws. If you could enter the room and provide your comments.
Thank you, Chairman Bulova, members of the committee. Jen Michelle Padini on behalf of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. First, we'd like to thank you, Leader Herring, and the committee for their work on this legislation. Next, I'll reiterate the need for minor technical yet important definitional amendments of cannabis retailer, cannabis products, and personal cultivation. We must be thoughtful and intentional in our language choice as we move away from criminalization and further into regulation. NORML and Virginia NORML do remain concerned that the bill language specifically ensure that existing medical operators are able to participate in co-location and compete in a broadened marketplace. If they can't, then Virginia will experience what other states have with the dissipation of their medical program. Virginia patients will not be able to access the highly regulated and specialized products that they're currently depending on, and pediatric patients will altogether be eliminated from in-state access. NORML also suggests that personal cultivation not be limited to indoor only, as this will, again, like our current medical program, restrict participation to those affluent enough to participate. I'll also add that the APA process has created extraordinary hurdles for the medical program. It doesn't allow for the timely responses driven by the demands of either patients or fluctuations in industry, and has resulted in the continued need to legislate regulatory changes rather than rely on the protracted APA process. I did serve on both Secretary Kerry's medical cannabis work group and the governor's marijuana legalization work group, and was a chair of the legal and regulatory subcommittee. So I am available to provide any additional insights or considerations as they relate to public or consumer safety. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, or Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, we will next hear from Ngesi Baby. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Good afternoon, delegates. I'll be swift because you all have heard from me before, or many of you have. I'm the Director of Public Policy with Columbia Care. I'm also speaking on behalf of the Virginia Medical Cannabis Coalition in support of this bill, with some amendments to, again, reiterate the comments that have been shared to this point, to ensure that the medical operators can continue to provide care for patients, and that we move forward while still supporting those social equity goals. The amendments we have proposed to both the Senate and the House versions of this bill would ensure that a fee would be levied to provide early funds to the revolving loan fund, so that would be available in a timely fashion for aspiring entrepreneurs. Also require the regulator to certify adequate patient supply, but also allow us to and have us submit a DEI and outreach plan that the regulator would have the power to enforce. I think further, I understand there are many concerns around ensuring social equity businesses are able to enter the market and compete. And I think it's pretty clear from some of the standards put in here, and especially with a date of adult use sales starting at the same time for everyone, that medical operators would not be in any way unleveling the field. So I think with those types of requirements and limitations on our entry, thank you for your time this afternoon, and having also served on the governor's work group with Jen Michelle and others, happy to field any other questions later if helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, we will next hear from Amber Littlejohn of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. You could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Good afternoon, Chairman and delegates. Thank you, Leader Herring, for the opportunity to be here again today. My name is Amber Littlejohn, Executive Director of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. We are the only national trade association serving minority entrepreneurs and their communities. I'm here in support of HB 2312 and to ask for your support in amending the bill to ensure that it is both equitable and sustainable. Unfortunately, there is often a really big gap between what looks good and looks equitable on paper and what will actually create equity and provide the adequate guardrails and sustain legal challenges and get to the point of creating an equitable industry. And so I urge the delegates here to make sure that what is put forth is going to have that end effect. Starting with the definition of social equity, minority businesses are not monolithic. We want the opportunity for all individuals from the communities that have been most impacted by cannabis prohibition to participate. However, social equity directed at the citizens who are most impacted by prohibition needs to be crafted in a way that it is directing really limited resources to those individuals, and then others within the community that can access resources and capital outside of the program can do so. We want to ensure the most robust opportunities for minority community and the minority business community. And that means there has to be ample opportunities that are where small businesses and social equity applicants are getting priority, and then also really meaningful guardrails put on the amount of licenses and the amount of the market that large operators are allowed to occupy. However, a blanket ban on— The time of the witness has expired. You could conclude your remarks, please. Yeah, I am happy to answer questions about alternatives to the vertical integration, as well as a micro business model. And thank you for your time.
Great, thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, we will now hear from Michael Wilson of UFCW Local 400. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Again, Mike Wilson with United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 400. We represent around 10,000 workers in Virginia, mostly in grocery retail, but food processing and healthcare and other industries as well. We greatly appreciate all of the work that Chair Krizik and the subcommittee, as well as Leader Herring, Delegate Herodic, and Chairman Bulova have put into this bill already. We're very much in support of the addition of protections for workers that the subcommittee put in, and hope that that will be maintained and added to the Senate bill as well. We still want to make sure that their workers have a voice in this industry. That's the best way to ensure that there's equity, not just within ownership, but within the workforce. We represent workers in the cannabis industry in other parts of the country, including our local in Maryland and the District of Columbia. Again, the best way that we've seen to achieve the kind of equity goals that we're looking for among the workforce is to make sure that workforce has a voice on the job, which this bill now goes a longer way towards doing. We'd still like to see additional protections for labor peace agreements, and we're happy to discuss that further with folks who are interested. But again, appreciate the work that's been done so far and the acknowledgement of the need to preserve equity, not just for ownership in this industry, but for the workforce as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, we will next hear from Michael McDermott of Favor of Virginia. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Chairman Bulova, honorable delegates, want to thank you for all the hard work you've put into this momentous legislation brought to us from Leader Herring. I am Michael M. McDermott with Faces and Voices of Recovery of Virginia. If adopted, this bill proposes 25% of marijuana tax revenues to, and I quote, substance use disorder prevention and treatment programs, unquote, but doesn't specify program types. The recovery community would like to see a specified split of this 25%, again, a specified split, with at least half of it going to non-governmental organizations or NGOs delivering evidence-based, lived experience, substance use disorder recovery services. I'm an individual with more than 25 years of continuous sustained recovery from substance use disorder. Firsthand, I've witnessed evidence-based lived experience, substance sustained recovery from SUD. You're trying to get me to start my video, and unfortunately with the lighting here, it's not going to work, okay? Anyway, firsthand, I've witnessed evidence-based lived experience SUD recovery services, which for the most part have been unfunded or grossly underfunded, consistently deliver better outcomes than government services. The other point I'd like to make is with the board of directors, I'd like to see a good amount of inclusion from the recovery community. Thank you for your consideration of my views and for your continued dedicated, selfless public service to our Commonwealth.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, we will next hear from Billy Brown of the Cannabis Equity Coalition of Virginia. You can enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Billy Brown, and I am a founding member of CECVA, the Cannabis Equity Coalition of Virginia. And once again, CECVA is in support of Delegate Herring's bill. However, we are advocating that the bill be amended to increase the percentage of tax revenue allocated to the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund from 30% to 70%. The governor's bill has allocated 40% of tax revenues to fund pre-K education. And while CECVA is in favor of funding pre-K, this has always been a direct obligation of Virginia taxpayers from general fund revenues. CVA's position is that pre-K funding should continue to be fully supported and funded from general fund revenues. We strongly advocate that Virginia follow the New Jersey model and allocate 70% of tax revenue received from the adult use marijuana marijuana industry to the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund to be used exclusively to help repair families and communities that have been most hurt by Virginia's war on drugs. In addition, we are also requesting that the committee consider amending the makeup of the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board to be fully reflective of the population that it will be serving. I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, we will now hear from Dylan Bishop of Cannabis Business Association of Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, Dylan Bishop of the Cannabis Business Association of Virginia. I appreciate the diligence of this committee and the work of the subcommittee. We support the House bill that's presented before you, and applaud the Majority Leader for introducing this legislation. We do have three things that we would like to bring to your attention, and that is we want to make sure that our hemp industry participants also have the ability to participate in this adult cannabis use market. They have the expertise and are generally located in more rural areas of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we don't want rural Virginia to be lost in this equity conversation as well. We do think that the standalone regulatory agency should have additional regulatory flexibility, similar to that held by VDAX with the industrial hemp program. And one last thing, we have suggested one small definitional amendment, and that is to exclude hemp oils that are sold from a registered industrial hemp processor to a licensed pharmaceutical processor from the definition of marijuana throughout the code. That transaction is already permitted by the code. This would just make it more efficient. So with those remarks in mind, we would encourage this body to act on the bill favorably. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we will now hear from Ryan Suit. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Suit, and I'm the operations manager of a CBD and hemp business in Virginia Beach. I'd first like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the delegates for all your hard work on this bill. It's obviously a whole lot of complex issues involved, and I want to thank you for that. I wanted to speak today to discuss vertical integration on the adult side of the marijuana industry. Currently, vertical integration has been banned, but I think that is an outright ban is a mistake that will ultimately hurt small businesses. Vertical integration should not be confused with monopolization. A company that grows only one cannabis plant and makes edibles from that is technically vertically integrated, so it does not inherently create monopolies. I think a good compromise and solution to this issue is creating a category of micro business licenses. This is currently a scheme that is utilized in Michigan and was actually proposed earlier this afternoon in the subcommittee meeting by Ms. Littlejohn. And I believe that with the micro business licenses, they'll solve three main issues. First, they'll limit vertical integration only to small businesses, which is a guardrail against those large monopolies. Second, it allows for more small businesses to get involved, and it, in essence, carves out a spot in the industry for mom and pop shops, which goes towards social equity and is exactly what I think this committee wants to see happen. Finally, it allows for the ability for small businesses to grow. They can start off as micro businesses and later specialize in one of the other segments of the industry as they, grow and become more sophisticated in certain aspects of the supply chain. I believe that those micro businesses.
The time of the witness has expired. If you could conclude your remarks now.
Sure. I just believe that the micro business licenses would be the best way to create an environment for small businesses to succeed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I know Delegate Simon, your hand is up for the end of testimony. Delegate Van Valkenburg, did you have a question of one of the presenters?
Yeah, if I'm sorry, I forgot his name, the gentleman that was just on.
Mr. Suit.
I think this is just a good point to make clear, and then I'm going to ask him a question that the subcommittee, when we ban vertical integration, once again, I kind of want to clarify here, like I did with the medical, we are not against micro businesses having vertical integration. The decision to not include them in the moment was not based on wanting to keep them out. It was based on how do you do this responsibly and properly. So, kind of like we have these alcohol laws, and as new businesses popped up where it made sense to carve them out or to create exceptions for them, think your craft breweries, as those things came around, we've done that, right? And we've allowed small, vertically integrated places to exist. One of my favorite beer stores in Virginia is a vertically integrated craft brewery in Lakeside, right? But what we thought was a better decision was to not include it now because you don't know what you don't know. And so we don't know that if we craft the language now, we'll get it correct. And we don't want to create law that's bad law, that creates a bad procedure, or that allows big players to manipulate that. And so the idea was, right, not that we're hostile to them, but we want to make sure that we do it right. We see where the market goes, we see where the demand goes, we see what businesses do, and we can respond accordingly. And so I guess the question for the gentleman is, how does he see that view, right?
Mr. Suit, you want to respond?
Sure. Yes. So I guess the short. Are you asking what the micro business category would look like if I were?
What do you think of our approach?
I think the approach. Well, I think that Ms. Littlejohn earlier this afternoon said that the sooner that language is put into the bill, the better. And I would just echo that same thought.
Okay. Delegate Van Valkenburg, is that okay? Delegate Tran.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. A question.
And I'm thinking this is all a ploy to help get Mr. Suit extra time.
No, a genuine question for Ryan, if I may.
Sure.
And so I'm not on the subcommittee, so I'm just wrapping my mind around the conversations around vertical versus non-vertical integration. Can you help me understand from your perspective and experience if vertical integration was not allowed at this point and maybe later, do you think that like these small homegrown businesses could actually survive just as producers with 1 to potentially 5 licenses? Is that a sustainable business model for anybody to want to enter the market in just that one tier? Thank you.
Sure. I think it makes it more difficult if you're limited to only one tier. And it also raises a whole lot of questions as to where those tiers end and then begin. So if you have a business that's only involved in the cultivation sphere, are they allowed to can they sell their flower to a retailer, or are they allowed to, make a pre-roll out of it? Like, where does the cultivation end? But I think, as I believe it was Mr. Zeller said earlier, when you're starting off, it really is better to have, or at least have the opportunity to sell more than just flower. Or if you're a processor, you can't use your own flower. You have to buy someone else's. So as businesses are starting and figuring out what they're best at, having all those options on the table seems like the best way to start off. And to Delegate, I'm sorry, I can't read it. Van Valkenburg. Van Valkenburg. Yeah, I think that, starting off, not trying to make bad law does make sense. But I think that also may handicap the small businesses that are trying to figure out where they can get in, because specializing in just one tier would actually be more difficult.
Okay. One more for Delegate Van Valkenburg, then we need to move on to our other testimony.
Yeah, I think real quick comment is I think we know where one starts and one begins because we have 3-tier systems in other areas. But my question is, well, you say like if you just let everybody go into multiple tiers, it's the best way to start. But isn't that exactly what would facilitate bigger actors coming in who already have a template, who already have a business, who already have capital, who already have connections, and then they come into, say, Richmond, and they've got a ready-made advantage over small business. And so I don't see how allowing vertical integration doesn't benefit those entrenched interests. I guess I would wonder how you would respond to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chamberlain, if I may respond to that.
Yes.
The way that it's done in Michigan, I know that they first off limit the plant count. So they limit how many plants you can actually grow I think to 150 versus, the top tier, most plants you can grow is in the thousands, I believe. So that will limit the size of a business just by how many plants they can actually grow. I think Michigan also limits sales to only by those micro businesses. So they can sell directly to customers, but that's it. So, and if there's no internet sales allowed, that means your sales are limited only to customers who come to your store. So I think that there are some guardrails kind of built in to micro business licenses, or that can be built in, that would help to prevent large vertically integrated monopolies.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, if we could move on with our testimony.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We will next hear from Chelsea Wise of Marijuana Justice, speaking in favor of the legislation. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, the chairman and the committee. My name is Chelsea Higgs Wise. I'm the executive director of Marijuana Justice, a Black-led organization working for legislation to repeal and repay for the harms done by Virginia drug war. We've worked hard with national organizations like Drug Policy Alliance, as well as ACLU Virginia, Rise for Youth, and Cannabis Equity Coalition of Virginia. We're here to thank the committee for their hard work with banning vertical integration with these guardrails, as well as striking the language so that you can qualify by hiring people for social equity. We would also like to lift the piece about micro businesses. There's been a lot of discussion about that, so I won't hammer that in, but I do agree with the sooner than later, as well as also offering a piece of a delivery license like they've done in Massachusetts, and and having those strictly for social equity applicants for the first 3 years, which is pretty amazing. We'd also lift the idea of carving out at least 50% of the licenses to go to social equity licenses, so that we can have Virginia homegrown, because right now no other licenses are required for Virginia residency. So those are the 2 points, and we've met with many of you all and talked for weeks about micro businesses, and we've sent some language as well to the committee. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, the final testimony in favor of this legislation is Sean Fair of Dominion Cannabis. You could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
There we go. Can you all hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the delegates. I'll make this real quick. I know you heard from my business partner, Matt Zeller, a little bit ago. I've been in cannabis for about 4.5 years up here in Massachusetts. And I originally was going to speak about, I haven't heard too much about the banking industry, and I applaud all the efforts for the social equity movement. One of the things I really think we should think through is how these businesses are going to get the capital, and how they're going to hold the capital and clear it. Massachusetts, we let, as of now, 2 state chartered banks do our banking. And I've got colleagues and friends out in California and Oregon. We do it pretty well here in Massachusetts. So I would suggest maybe looking into that as a possible starting point. And then lastly, real quick, you mentioned a lot about vertical integration here. We are vertically integrated here in Massachusetts, and I would agree with the thought that there are some massive players coming in at 100, 200,000 square foot canopy grows, vertically integrated and looking to sell. And so there is a massive downside to it. I would also say, however, if you're growing on the medical side of things, once recreation comes on board, if you are a medical establishment and are putting more into your R&D and more into your quality and care, if you're now competing in that same market with someone in the residential space who maybe doesn't have those same standards, if you can't vertically integrate and sell your own product, I can tell you what's happening here. What we're seeing is people are getting out of the medical market, the growers, and just want to get in the residential market because it's much easier and just as profitable, if not more profitable. So just, again, there's no right answer to this. Unfortunately, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't vertically integrate, but they're kind of 2 sides of the coin, and maybe having some type of guardrails on either side. If you want to vertically integrate, you can't have more than 10,000 or 20,000 square foot canopy grower or something along those lines. So the bigger players wouldn't be attracted to the model, and it would help some of those smaller players get the capital and getting up and running. So just some food for thought, but thank you for having me, and thanks again for all your hard work.
Thank you. And I appreciate those insights from Massachusetts. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chairman, we are now hearing testimony against the legislation. First, hearing from Wes Shepard. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Wes Shepard. I'm a practicing physician and pulmonologist of many years, a professor of medicine with significant experience in caring for those with marijuana use, abuse, complications of substance abuse in general. I urge you to please remain focused on the fact that this is primarily an issue of health and public health. I and other medical colleagues are deeply concerned that we have lost sight of the forest for the trees with this issue where the health aspects have largely been ignored in committee discussions throughout the General Assembly. I recognize this committee is well into the minutia of the bill, but we must first remember this is first and foremost undeniably a health issue for the people of Virginia. These issues that have been discussed in terms of equity, integration, et cetera, are very important, but they are greatly outweighed by the negative health aspects that will follow. For the last year, we've emphasized listening and believing to the science during the pandemic. I would encourage you to do the same with this issue. There's a reason why not a single major medical society advocates for the legalization of recreational marijuana. They recognize many health consequences and recommend at a minimum more research, as suggested by the NIH, the CDC, the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. These are the world's experts and leaders in medicine. Listen to the science. What medical science knowledge has Virginia and the Virginia General Assembly gained that these expert bodies have not been able to discern? The governor's own report to you all.
The time of the witness has expired.
If you could just wrap up with a couple final comments.
The ultimate question in the setting of already decriminalizing marijuana and that medical marijuana is gaining accessibility in Virginia, ultimately, do you truly believe that the health of Virginians, minorities, youth will truly benefit from widespread legalization? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Simon.
Okay, quick question to Mr. Shepard. Is that Mr. Shepard?
Certainly, if Mr. Shepard is willing to take said question.
Yes, sir.
Be careful, Mr. Shepard. I don't know if you know Delegate Simon.
Yeah, my question would be, would you support banning and making illegal smoked tobacco products everywhere in the Commonwealth?
Well, I am a pulmonologist, so there is essentially zero health benefit and benefit to tobacco products, and that is a complicated subject as well. But I would support such a ban as someone who cares for these patients over many years with incredible costs to society and culture and healthcare from those products.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chairman, we will next hear from Tom Intorcio of the Virginia Catholic Conference. If you could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tom Intorcio. I'm an associate director with the Virginia Catholic Conference. As it's already been stated, THC in marijuana is an addictive substance. 1 in 10 adults and 1 in 6 adolescents who try marijuana will become addicted to it. It increases the risk of mental illnesses, psychosis, depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia. It increases the risk of 6 times the normal person. Legalization sets a bad example for children. Although the bill purports to legalize marijuana for adults only 21 and older, the industry's marketing will entice minors such as Big Tobacco did. Under the bill, marijuana shops would sell it by the plastic bag, but also offer high concentrate vaping devices and edibles laced with THC. Edibles include cookies, gummy bears, candy, soda, and even ice cream. If the marijuana industry gets its way, many of its products will land in the hands of children because these products are a key profit driver. Case in point, Colorado. Colorado has seen increased demand on hospitals and a sharp rise in emergency room visits. ER visits there have increased 54% since commercialization was passed. Hospitalizations increased 101% year to year. Also, as both in Colorado and Washington State, legalizing marijuana will lead to a higher volume of traffic fatalities and injuries. The rate of teen suicide in Colorado increased 58%. Finally, reports of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and self-harm are escalating right now in the Commonwealth, in the city of Richmond, particularly among Black and Latino children. For these reasons, we urge you to vote no on HB 2312 and to oppose any other bill that would legalize commercialized marijuana. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the testimony against the legislation. We have one representative testifying in favor, with no position on the bill, if you would like to hear from him at this time.
Yes, please.
All right, we will now hear from Kirk Erickson of the Washington Regional Alcohol Program. You could enter the room and unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kurt Erickson. It sounds very nebulous that we don't have a position on the bill. I head up the Virginia-based Washington Regional Alcohol Program, which is a 39-year-old nonprofit fighting impaired driving in the Commonwealth. And while we don't have a position on legalization, we are unequivocally supportive of a couple of potential discussed amendments that have come up at the subcommittee level, that being specifically initiating a public education campaign to accompany this bill before actually legalization, and to maintain a dedicated revenue stream for public awareness on the dangers of drug driving. I think the term has been very well used today in terms of guardrails. We view these as public safety and public health guardrails. And just for the fact that marijuana is the illicit drug most frequently found in the blood of drivers involved in crashes, including fatal ones, according to the National Institutes of Health. And that the timing for our discussion on this is great because just this week, the Colorado State Patrol just announced findings in that state that has legalized marijuana that says that marijuana DUI arrests are up a whopping 48% last year. This is 2020. And that the Colorado Department of Transportation found that marijuana impaired fatal crashes have risen steadily every year between 2017 and 2019. And so for those reasons, again, we cannot speak more highly of the guardrails of a public education campaign and a funding mechanism for those, simply to remind persons of the dangers of drug driving. Thank you.
Thank you for that testimony. And I guess for the record, I couldn't agree with you more with respect to the need to focus on driving while under the influence. What somebody does is their own personal business, is quite different if somebody is intoxicated and gets on the road with other people. But thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, does that complete who's in the waiting room?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, it does.
Very good. All right. So at this point, we want to make sure that we're respectful of people's time. We'll wrap up at least by 5 o'clock. But if we could bring the patron of the bill into the room in case there are particular issues that she wants to weigh in on as part of the discussion. And then, of course, she'll always, as the patron, get the last word. But at this point, if we've got folks who would like to ask questions, Delegate Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess a couple quick questions, and I guess maybe one statement, if I can. The procedurally piece of this, we've talked about this being the first stop on a lengthy road for this bill. And I guess I'd like some clarity from the patron, but also from the committee members that we're not going to rehash all of these issues at every stop, right? Because I got to be in courts tomorrow I'm hoping that we're going to deal with a different set of issues. And so I want people to understand, because we talked about how there's another couple of committees that are going to hear it. Some of these things will probably ultimately get answered when we get a Senate version, and we have a House and a Senate version to put together, and they may have taken a different approach to some of these things than we have. And I think that's when a lot of this may get sorted out. So keep in mind that there's the House, there's the courts, we have appropriations, we have the House floor, we have the Senate committees, and then we have ultimately a conference committee to deal with all these things. But I just want to make sure that there's no expectation we're going to revisit, for instance, the issue of vertical integration. That to me seems to be a squarely general laws, ABC gaming kind of a question. more than a courts question. Is my understanding of how this process is supposed to work accurate?
Yeah. Delegate Simon, I was going to kind of save that for my closing remarks.
Oh, sorry.
But yes, we are operating kind of, within our three different spheres. And so while we'll continue working on these issues, we do want to make it clear that courts is going to deal with courts type issues. Appropriations is going to deal with how that funding is distributed and appropriated. And while, we'll go ahead and act on this piece of legislation, we'll continue to work on those other issues behind the scenes, realizing that even outside the committee process, there's multiple points that we'll be able to continue to perfect and put in changes. So thank you for bringing that up, Delegate Simon.
Mr.
Delegate
Chairman?
Simon.
Yeah, so then since I've got the floor, I'll grab it for a second. On the two substantive issues I just wanted to quickly mention, and it was the reason for my question for the pulmonologist, right? Legalization it's a complicated issue. I think there are various reasons, and many of us may have different reasons for thinking it's a good idea. We may have different reasons for thinking it's a good idea. For me, it's a lot like the decision we made last year to legalize sports betting, for instance, right? It wasn't that we all think everybody should go out and bet all their money on sports and spend a lot of money on that, but the fact is we knew it's happening. It's happening in illicit markets. It's happening in places where we couldn't control it, where we didn't have safeguards, we didn't have consumer protections. By bringing it into the light, we have opportunities to put those kind of protections and even more, right? And player protections can come in the future, and we can continue to add on. So I think that's a part of this is this is happening, right? I think a lot of the things that the folks in general laws, the balancing act was, how much do? We don't want to make it so difficult and so expensive to start a business that we don't wipe out the illicit market with our legal market, right? So I think that's a big piece for people to keep in mind. And then finally, on the vertical integration piece, I just want to say we have a 3-tier system for beer and wine in Virginia for the most part. I will say that the idea of the micro licenses intrigues me, right? Because not like craft, if we were starting from scratch today on alcohol and wine, we probably wouldn't say, well, we're going to do a 3-tier system and then wait 2 years to allow craft breweries, because we know they exist, right? That business model does exist. So I am intrigued by the idea of maybe starting small, but I generally think it's a good thing that we don't have a Budweiser store, which is the only place you can buy beer in some communities, the way that Starbucks seems to have cornered the market on coffee. I think it's a good thing and will help keep the thing small. So with that, I'll stop and let other people talk. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Simon. Delegate Leftwich and then Delegate Hurst.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to respond to a few comments I made about legalizing and trying to stamp out an existing market. Two states, California, Colorado, states have had a lot of experience in making this legal, have not been able to cut out the black market. In fact, they found that organized crime has almost tripled. That Mexican cartels are coming in and using advantage of the ability to grow and transport to grow the drug. And so while you may have a decrease in arrest rates for those who are using and possessing, the organized element crime of those increases dramatically. And the black market is not stamped out. You still have people sitting on the street corner selling because they can sell it without a 30% tax and a structure to operate out of and having to buy a license. So we're not going to get rid of the illegal trade. Now, if folks want to legalize it, that's one issue, but let's just not fool ourselves on what problems we think we're solving.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Leftwich. Delegate Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking to the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr.
For the screen.
Thank you. I will try not to take up too much of the committee's time. I first want to thank the work of everybody that has tried to meaningfully end the prohibition on adult use of cannabis in Virginia. And it's included many stakeholders, many citizens of Virginia and beyond, members of the governor's administration, the governor himself, and now members of the legislature. And so part of the last week has been sort of a confluence of many different components for what we actually have to do if we want to change the law. And that's created some late nights and early mornings. I want to especially say thank you to David May, our counsel, who was so collaborative and genuine in wanting to be good counsel and to help us come to a good work product. I will say, though, that, again, this is a stop along the way. And our trepidation moving forward, I think, needs to be buoyed with
they can't hear you
in the committee process. As it goes to courts and as it goes to appropriations, as it goes to the floor and as it goes over to the other lesser body. And we will get whatever work product they have to send to us. I am committed to wanting to make sure that we address equity in a meaningful way, to the most meaningful that the people who are actually representative of those communities want us to do it. That's frankly my position on it. I don't want to have to be told what to do. I don't think that that's the job of impacted communities. I think it's my job to seek out and learn. But we've been, I think, again, very collaborative in this process and are after the same overall agenda and objective, at least on the majority party and in the majority side of the aisle at this point. There are things that I think are very well intentioned that, again, we just have kind of maybe run out of time at this particular forced meeting that's in a compressed state virtually for us to address things like a micro license for some more boutique parts of this nascent industry. I would not vote for anything on the floor unless it contains provisions for that. I also want to lay a marker that I don't plan on supporting anything moving forward unless we do meaningfully address the medical cannabis access issues that have been raised by patients and their advocates for what we might do to the current medical industry as we move forward and the market implications that has, wanting to make sure that patients remain whole. But I have every confidence we're going to be able to do that. We're going to have some fundamental disagreements on whether or not we should. I would say that reasons why you still have a black market for cannabis are multivariate for the entire country. But that taxation seems to do a pretty good job. If we can at least make it cheaper to buy legally than illegally, most people are probably going to want to do it legally. At least that's what we might see here in Virginia. And if you don't, and the other question too is on local option. And I just want to say, as a representative of a rural community, I know that some of my localities and their representation and the citizens thereof might not want to have marijuana be sold in their community. If the market doesn't demand it at a local level, then you won't have it be sold. But I know a lot of farmers in areas where we had a lot of dry counties not too many years ago in this Commonwealth who now are really looking for an opportunity to try a new crop, which could actually be a legitimate crash crop when they've been searching for one for a long time. I think that this is a great endeavor for us. The one thing I want to finish up by saying, Mr. Chairman, is that we still have time. We still can basically say what our values are, which is that we want to legalize. We want to legalize it. We want to decriminalize possession. We want to not have you have any interaction with police for possession of marijuana as long as it's within certain bounds. But that how we determine this regulatory framework, we put a huge down payment on. But if we need to continue to make modifications before money actually starts changing hands, I think we still have an opportunity to do so. And I look forward to continuing to work on that.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Hurst. Delegate Wright, then Delegate Price, and then Delegate Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take but just a couple of minutes. One thing I wanted to say was that to put the whole emphasis on this marijuana legalization for the purpose of social equity, in my opinion, it's demeaning and insulting to the people in those communities. What's going to happen when this thing fails, when we have the health problems that have been predicted, when we have the same problems that we've had wherever casinos come and that sort of thing, to say, well, this was done, for social equity. I think if you're going to try to sell marijuana legalization, you ought to try to do it upright. Don't try to bring some communities into this that are you're setting them up to be a scapegoat for what I think is going to be a disastrous effect for our state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Wright. Delegate Price.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because it seems like there are not going to be any amendments made, and we are going to be asked to weigh on this, that I would second the sentiments that have basically mentioned that a yes vote today does not mean that we agree with every single word of the document. It means that we want the conversation to move forward. And I still, for those that will see a next look at this, whether it's courts, appropriations, want to remind members that the question was asked about input from impacted communities. And I think it needs to be very clear where that happens in addition to the legislative process now. And so I just do not want a situation where those that may not live in an impacted community, may have never lived in an impacted community, are telling impacted communities what they need. So I want to make sure that there's an outlet for that input. So I would appreciate amendments to come from that and to continue the conversation to make sure that the products that are available in the medical market continue to be available for those that need it for their quality of life. So again, a yes vote doesn't mean we love every single word, but that we are appreciative of the hard work going into it and want to continue the work.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Price. Delegate Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Legalization is one issue. Whether or not you think marijuana should be legalized for recreational use, that's one issue, and you can have opinions on that on both sides. However, I'm very concerned about the way that this is going, this legislation. I fear we're creating a bureaucratic nightmare to try to regulate this, and I agree with Delegate Leftwich that this is not the way to go if you want to get rid of the black market. I'm concerned that this may be used as a model for changes to future license renewals for other areas. So I'm very concerned about the way this is being done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Cole. Delegate Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I just want to hit three quick things. Speaking to the bill, Mr. Chairman.
You have the screen.
Thank you. First is one thing that we didn't talk a lot about, but I think is important to note as we move forward, and that this substitute I think does a really good job of, is public health. I think this substitute in very important ways, it kind of pushes that public health component to the forefront, whether it's in the advertising campaigns that have been noted, or it's giving the health board a veto over public health regs, or other elements like our advertising, tightening the advertising pieces. I want to make sure that we're all aware of that piece, because I think that piece is really important. The second piece I want to note is around the kind of vertical integration thing. Once again, I think what's partially getting lost is we're not saying in some spaces that vertical integration isn't appropriate. We're saying for the most part it's not, right? And that three-tiered system that Delegate Simon talked about is appropriate. The boutique stuff, the medical stuff, it's just the devil's in the details. And we wanted to make sure that everybody was really focused on that to make sure we got it right. And third and finally, I guess I would respond to Delegate Wright by saying, when you talk about social equity, and what I think this bill does a really good job of, and Delegate Aird has already talked to some of this stuff, both in sub and today and full, is what it does is it really, and I think our sub does a better job, is it makes it so that we're empowering individuals and we're empowering communities to have ownership and to create a business environment where those local businesses can build out, and that capital can get reinvested in other businesses and in other parts of the community. And when you start to see consolidation, and when you start to see outside players, or when you water down the social equity pieces, you lose that. And I think what's really come along in this bill is that we are doing a better job of ensuring communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the drug war are now going to have the tools to have ownership, right? And that's at the individual level, but it's also at the community level, which is one piece of this conversation I don't want to lose. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I hope everybody will support this bill as it moves forward, because I think we took a good product, we made it better, and I think obviously there's places to go with it, but I think we're on the right track. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Why don't we go ahead and bring Leader Herring into the room if she would like to say any last remarks or provide any thoughts about where we are in the process. And I don't see anybody else with their hands up at this point. So Leader Herring.
Yes. Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
We can. Thank you.
See me? All right. Yep. Well, again, I want to thank you and the committee and the subcommittee and Chairman Krizik. This has been It's been definitely a process, and we're going to continue. So I first thank you all for that sort of open-mindedness that this is going to continue. I have not been shy about pushing for vertical integration. As I share it with the subcommittee, when I first looked at this, I was like, oh my goodness, no vertical integration, not at all. And I share your concern about large businesses coming in. But I'm also very concerned about small businesses and the ability to grow. And I hear the word sort of, I'm going to just be honest, sort of like, let's
There
wait.
was no choice. This one is French.
Kathleen, if you could turn off your, thank you.
And sort of, and Delegate Van Valkenburg mentioned a time where, you know, we sort of broke off and had exceptions for microbreweries or micro businesses. And then I reflect about, well, what caused that? And that honestly is political power that caused that, obviously. Clearly, there was something that happened, and it is political power that caused that break off. In my vision, my view, that political power is sitting here in your homes and your communities in Richmond have petitioned us now to start thinking and actually acting on vertical integration. I am concerned that small businesses will start, that we are shackling them with a system if we decide not to do it, where they can't grow and become competitive in what will probably be a national market. And so I think our businesses, I think that we have this opportunity is unique. I see cannabis different than alcohol, and this is why. Alcohol was not used like cannabis in terms of over-policing, arrests, prosecutions, and damaging communities and preventing generational wealth. So I disagree with the delegate who said that this will fail. It doesn't have to fail. But I do think it does take our will to open our minds and think about how cannabis is different from alcohol. I have appreciation for the three-tier system. I get it. But I also think there's a way that we can put guardrails in to protect these big businesses coming in. And I will say that as I am a member of the community that has been oppressed by some of these laws, and I just want to do good, and I want to help communities, and I feel that this is a reform. This is a part of the healing process when it comes to over-policing and over-prosecution. So I thank you, Mr. Chair, for at least being open into the conversation, and I know that this is a process and will continue to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader Herring. And so I don't see any of their hands up. Let me just say a couple of final thoughts, and some of them have been brought up throughout the afternoon. And so, one is that this is a very complicated issue, and I remember sitting through the JLARC study and looking at all the different kind of decision points that we would have to make if we were to consider legalization of cannabis. And it isn't like flipping on a light switch, and it certainly isn't ceding that policy decision authority to a regulator. We need to make sure that we're being very deliberative with respect to that direction we were providing. And that gets to the second point, which is we do need to be deliberative. We are setting up a system that if we adopt it, will be around for a long time, and people are going to be making business decisions based on an understanding that what we put in place is going to be around for a while. So this is part of a larger discussion. I want to thank again our ABC subcommittee. They've done yeoman's work putting together the substitute that we have before you. I know that Delegate Krizik has been tracking the different ideas that have been brought up in terms of continuing to perfect this piece of legislation. He'll hate me for saying this, but he has been kind of our point person. He knows this piece of legislation as well as anybody. So if you do have additional suggestions, remember that we have to adopt actual language. We don't adopt concepts. And so if you have specific language that you want us to consider, please send it to Delegate Krizik, and he can kind of be our repository for tweaks that are in the purview of general laws. For Paul, yes. I will say that I wish we could continue to perfect that in a meeting like this. but I'm also hesitant about making changes on the fly. I'm not sure that we would do ourselves any good service for doing that. And so again, we have what I think is a step forward, and that I think has some good ideas in it, and we'll continue to perfect that. With respect to the issue of vertical integration, I think we've got the best minds out there who have a wealth of information to help continue to let that evolve. And so I know that that's been the lion's share of this conversation, and I have no doubt that we're going to be able to come up with something that I think will be best for Virginia and respecting the values that we're trying to adopt here. And then again, for me, and I think for a lot of you, this is not the final decision. I have concerns about the legislation, and there are some pieces in there that are important to me. I'm very concerned about health and safety. The part about driving while under the influence really strikes at my heart. But again, I feel comfortable that we've done our due diligence and want to make sure that we have the opportunity for this to go to courts, has the opportunity to go to appropriations, and that we continue to work on this. And so with that, this committee operates by motion.
Move to report the substitute and refer to the courts committee.
Okay.
Second.
All right, it's been properly seconded. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Mr. Chairman, shall I call the names of those I do not see voting electronically?
Yes, please.
Delegate Torian. Delegate Torian.
Delegate Torian votes yay.
Delegate Torian votes aye.
Oh.
Delegate Cole.
Nay.
Delegate Cole votes nay. Delegate Knight.
Aye.
Delegate Knight votes aye. Delegate Brewer. Delegate Brewer. Chairman Bulova.
Aye.
Chairman Bulova votes aye.
All right, the clerk will close the roll. That bill reports and refers with a substitute to appropriations or to courts. Madam Clerk, is there any further business to come before the committee this afternoon?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes all items on the docket.
Very good. All right. Again, thank you very much for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. I couldn't be more proud of our committee. We get in there and make sure we're trying to do the right thing. And so have a great weekend. If I could get a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. All right. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.
Mr. Chair, I just knew you were going to say we get into the weeds.
I almost